Alright, this is the first in a short series that will get you up and running with Druid Builder in no time. Note that I'll be ad-libbing here, trying to get everything in a single take, so please ignore the hesitations and small mistakes that are bound to slip in. So here we are, the builder's been installed and we're ready to rock. Now we need something to do. Thankfully, we got a contract to equip the world's coolest animal sanctuary. Yes, admire that logo. I spent more time than I should have putzing around with it. So we've set up our hypothetical hardware, and now we want to be able to manage it out of the tropical rain, so we're going to provide a user interface that acts like so. We've got a main menu with a couple of commands, some submenus organized by animal type, which we'll look into as we go along. So the first thing to do is to just create a new project. So we can give it any name, but spaces aren't allowed because of technical reasons we'll see later. So let's just call it, let's say Sanctuary. Okay, now we've got our new project, and our first step is to go to the Design tab here. So what you'll find is that at the top here is stuff we can add. In the middle, the bluish green stuff is basically what the interface is going to be, what it's going to look like. So it represents the Druid user. And the swap space down there we'll look at in a little bit. So on the top level, we've got two commands. Commands are the most basic of our items here because what they do is they basically just call a callback. They execute some function whenever they're clicked. So clicking the add command button here gives us this little pop-up. Our first command was basically to show the stock levels, so let's call it stock levels. Now you'll notice the callback here is automatically populated. You can always change that, but the defaults will do fine. Help info, show stock levels, is any sentence you would like. Just remember that we're on embedded devices, so space is at a premium. We'll keep our strings relatively short. So doing that, poof, there you go. Our first button. Isn't that awesome? Okay, so let's add the second one right away. Feed all animals. Let's just call it feed all. Okay, so we have our two buttons here, the main menu. We can move them around if we want. Resort. Let's call this something more interesting as well. So, Sanctuary. Well, that's interesting. Bug to fix before the release. Animals. Sanctuary. Okay. So you can always edit what's at the menu by clicking on it like we just did. So now we have our main menu all set up. It's time to add our second kind of item, which is submenus. These guys will include other commands and inputs, obviously. So let's see, let's start with the simple one, the tigers. Tigers. Rawr. Okay, so there it is. Again, we can just move it around if we want, but let's keep it at the bottom. Tigers. Clicking on it will bring us within the submenu, of course, where we can add the relevant commands. So we've got two in this case. The delicious empty litter. Clean it up. Okay, and feed. Now we're going to have a feed command for all our animals. The point here is that the callback is called doFeed, but since we're going to be using namespaces, there's no problem. There won't be any collisions there. We'll see that later. So feed the tigers. All right, we're done with our first submenu. Here it is. So that's pretty much it. All we have to do is click this, get back to the top. Now we're there. So let's do the monkeys now. A little bit more interesting. Submenu for these guys. Monkeys. Monkeys. Let's call. Forget the help. Okay. Within the monkeys, we have a command, the same one as the other one. So feed the monkeys. Okay. And we have our first input. Now, inputs are actually requests for data, information, configuration, whatever, from the user. So this allows them to feed data into the system. So when you click the add input button here, you get a list. So obviously toggles are like booleans, switch something on or off, yes or no, true or false. Ranges are numerical values between a minimum and a max. Selectors are just selections from a list of limited options. Whole numbers and decimals are various kinds of numbers you can figure out, and text is just a string of characters. So in this case, what we want is to turn on the webcam and turn it off because, well, you know monkeys. So, webcam. Turn off. Okay, and we're done with our second menu here. Let's go to the fish. Okay, back up here, we're going to create a new submenu. Boop. Fishes. Fishies. Okay, so in here, again, we have the feed. Fish. Okay, and all right, now we've got a perfect opportunity to use some more interesting inputs like ranges. So we've got the saltwater thermostat and the freshwater thermostat to set. Let's start with the saltwater here. So salt tanks, I don't know. And it's between 26 and 32 degrees C. Yeah, let's not get confused. Okay, now as we can see, we have a little slider here, and it actually kind of works, but not really. Clicking, in this case, if you have a command and you click on it, you get to edit it. If you want to edit these controls with a little model here, like the range sliders, you actually have to click on the name. So there we go. We could do the same for the fresh water, but we're going to use a different kind of input just so we can demonstrate that. So fresh water is going to be between 20 and 28. Let's call it whole numbers, and we'll just give it fresh tanks. Okay. Fresh water. Okay, so we're done with the fish. And now, finally, our most complex menu, our friendly reptiles. So, a new submenu, reptiles, lizards, such. Oop, there we go. Now we can go in there. Okay, what do we have? Let me cheat here and see. Okay, we've got lighting, we've got feed, and then we've got a couple of more complicated things. So we're going to do the feed first. Feed the reptiles. Now, at any point, if you're worried or just cautious, you can save the project and it'll be stored on the disk. As we were working here, it was all in memory, but should we close the program, it would have just disappeared. So save it once in a while. Okay, so now we have another on or off switch. So let's just use the toggle here. So lighting, pretty obvious. I don't think we need a help. Okay, some more interesting values here. We've got fountains and heat lamps, both of which allow us a range of selections, but a limited range. So this isn't like a number; it's more like a select box. So basically, a drop down. So this input is a little different, a little more complicated, but hardly. So let's start with the fountains. Now, these guys need options. They need at least two. So let's start with the fountains. We said that it was off. You can just press enter. I could delete it by doing this, boop, but let's not do that. Off. Okay, tundra, misty. Now, there's a reason I'm making this so long. It's because the interface is actually going to react differently depending on the the content of the select boxes. So now we've got 6. By default, Serial UI supports up to 6 options, although that's settable with a define if you want to mess around in the library. So, how much rain? There we go. So now we have our fountains. If we click on it, look at that. Nice little menu. Okay. So now the heat lamps. We're basically going to do the same thing. We're going to set a select box for the heat lamps. But by keeping the strings relatively short, so instead of minimum, I'll just say min, standard, and max. There we go. Now as you can see, let's call it heat lamps, just to remind everybody. As you can see, it's basically the same thing. It's a selector, so everything's fine there. And well, what do you know? I think we're done. So there is one more little interesting tidbit here. Let's save the project like that. Boop. Now, let's say I want to put the fishes in the monkeys for some reason. I want to feed the monkeys with fishes. Now, if I click on it, I go within the menu. But if instead of clicking, I could dump it in the trash, but let's not do that. Put it in the swamp space here. Now, if I go into the monkeys, I can dump the fishes in here. And as you can see, it still contains everything it really needs to have in there. So it moves in it. You can move them around that way, and it's actually pretty sweet. And one of the reasons it's really sweet is if you do this, project, and there we go. My fishes are here, and I just copy them over with all their content, and it's a great way to move stuff around between projects. Okay, so let's go back to our sanctuary. Forget this guy. Okay. So it looks like we have everything we need. We could sort everything. We could play around with the UI as much as we want, but we're basically finished the design phase. Now look at the structure. It's pretty complicated. It has a lot of stuff in it, and we just did it within a couple of minutes. Okay, so now the thing is that if we generated this program, it wouldn't actually do anything because we didn't hook it up. But we can still do that. You can take your project and check out the code tab here. It gives you a little summary. You can put your copyright, blah, blah. And now later we're going to customize all this stuff. But for the moment, we're just going to brew this, okay? So we click on brew my potion, and it sends it off, and it starts the generation process. Now, the project here is going to be basically empty. However, the whole point is to show the structure of the system. All right, there we go, we passed. Now, our project is ready. We have a little report concerning how large the program size is, how much of the data space we're using up. So with all these inputs, with all these menus and stuff, and those text strings, we're basically taking half of the space on a Uno and 30% of the data space. So let's download that. Here we go. Now, Edge. Save that. Open folder. Extract that. Yes, yes, yes. And here we are. Would you look at that? Let's open it up in our favorite IDE. Quote. And here we go. The project is ready. You've got everything you need, and it's all set up. So let's take a look at the files. Sanctuary here is the INO file, so it's basically the main driver. You've got plenty of comments to figure out what's going on, but you don't even have to look at this file. The setup function is here, the main loop, all the serial UI stuff is taken care of. Okay, that's pretty much it. Here's our project header. In here, you have the definitions of all the structures and all the functions and everything you need to be able to call them from the various files. Everything is in its own namespace, so if you see here, we're basically in animals monkeys now, so here's a do feed. Now we're in animals fishes, and here's a do feed, and that way they don't collide. The settings file, so project name settings.h, contains some defines that allow you to easily set stuff up, like the serial baud rate here. By default, it's 57600. You can set it to whatever works for you, and there's a couple more things in there. The setup file you don't even have to look at, but if you're curious, you can. It has a lot of stuff that you would have to do if you weren't using Builder, which is basically creating these submenus and then adding to each submenu some commands, adding requests, doing all the stuff that really is a pain in the butt. And finally, the file that's most interesting to you as a developer is the callbacks file. The callbacks is where the implementations happen. Now, we didn't fill anything out in the customized code part, so we did nothing. But the generators, what they do is they kind of give you something anyways, depending on settings. We'll cover that later. But okay, comments, and here we go. So here's our stock levels callback, and it gives stock levels trigger. So let's try this out. I'm going to compile it while we're looking at it. Now, each of these functions has some little placeholder code that says, okay, I was triggered, or here's a webcam, which was a toggle. So it basically has an input variable, and it spits out whether it's on or off. Okay, So let's see. Done uploading. So it says. Okay, well let's find out if that worked. Here's device Druid. Let's go and check out the device. Boop. Now, like I said, it was 57,600. So let's connect. And there you go. Magic. Now, if I click on any of these things, those placeholder pieces of code are called, so nothing really interesting happens, but you do know that everything's working. Your speed all. Let's go into the tigers. Oh, I can empty the litter. Let's go into something more interesting here, the reptiles, right? Let's see. We'll turn that on. Lighting is on. Ah, here we go. Misty. Okay. So that's pretty sweet. Okay, so in the next phase, what we're going to do is disconnect here. Floop. And for our next phase, we're going to start dealing with customizing the code.